So thank you. Many thanks to all the panelists and attendees for joining us today for the MS Quarterly Showcase for the Next Generation Information Systems Theory special issue. The idea behind the showcase sessions is to give our audience an early exposure to all the papers and publications in the special issue. The fundamental motivation for having this special issue is just because our field, IS field, is very exciting, right? In the next 10 years, we have seen many exciting new phenomena, big data, Internet of Things, AI, analytics, and so on and so forth. All those new technologies have enabled new innovations. Well, at the same time, they created certain concerns related to human dignity, privacy, security, ethical issues, and so on and so forth. So observing the bright side and also the dark side of the new technologies, we are thinking, what is the responsibility of IS scholars? So what is the role that IS scholars should play in academia? So from one angle, one answer could be that the field needs to produce new theory to help understand the new world. Just because the world is becoming increasingly interconnected, dynamic, and complex. So we need new theories because new theory help us to make sense of the world, sometimes to offer new explanations and make predictions. So in this special issue, we end up with 5 great papers, theory papers. They help us to understand the new world. They deal with either enduring or emerging phenomena, but all of them offer new theoretical insights to help us to better understand today's world. And actually, by doing this special issue, it is also a learning process for us. As we talked to our authors, reviewers, and associate editors, as well as other colleagues, as we manage this special issue, we listened to different opinions and advices. A common question underlying those different opinions is about the value and the need of theory in today's academia. Do we need theory? Did we overemphasize the importance and value of theory? If we need theory, how do we better theorize? So there are different opinions and advices. We believe the MS Quarterly should be open and inclusive. We think such debating is healthy for the field. As a result, we added provocations in the special issue. So our journey took more than 2 years, almost 3 years, from the very beginning, the call for abstracts and papers in early 2018 to summations of over 170 extended abstracts, to over 60 submitted papers, and to a milestone workshop held in 2019 at the iSchool at Maryland. Brian, thank you again. And to the end of the day, 5 research papers and 8 publications. We deeply thank the chief editor and our colleagues in the MSQ editorial board to work together to make this happen. We thank the associate editors and reviewers. We together create this fantastic special issue. As I mentioned just now, the idea of running the showcase session is to offer an early look at the papers and the publications. They are forthcoming. Today is session 2. Actually, session 1 was held 2 days ago. It was very successful, created interesting discussions 2 days ago. Today is session 2. There are 2 full theory papers and 3 invited publications. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Dorsey and Agatha to talk about their care theory, focusing on human dignity and personal data digitalization. Dorsey, please.
Thank you so much, Sean. And we want to thank all the senior editors that have made this the whole special issue possible. It's been a great experience, and we're deeply indebted, Olgierd and I are deeply indebted to, especially to Susan and Andrew, who were the two of the senior editors that were on calls with us frequently, helping us plan a path for our revisions, and also Shaila Miranda, our associate editor, was so insightful and encouraging. So we had a really wonderful experience and a very meaningful project, and we're so happy to be here today. So our talk is on the care theory. CARE stands for claims, affronts, response, and equilibrium. We'll state that up front. And I want to state up front, it's a grand theory. Grand theories are intended to be broad, they're intended to be abstract. They should provide a global paradigm. Actually, they should sound fairly intuitive once you get the principles established of the theory. The theorization to get to the principles can be quite difficult and involves a lot of logic and thinking and argumentation. We won't go through that in this presentation, so we'll present the theory itself and present the implications for all the theorization and all the steps to get to the actual assertions, theoretical assertions. We would need to consult with the paper. So let's start out and talk about what we mean by personal data digitalization. So we did not want this to be dependent on any technology, so it needs to transcend technologies, because technologies will come and go. But anything that includes personal data about the person, regardless of the data type, it can be biological data, it can be health data, it can be psychological data, any data, behavioral data, but about the person that's in a system, so it's in a digital form. We're labeling that personal data digitalization. And we wanted to think of what are the central forms this takes. And we refer to these as encounters because they're not intended, as I said, to represent a technology. They're representing a person, their data, and then some system that's using it. So we divide it into 4 central encounters: knowing self, knowing other, and showing other. The knowing other and showing other can be micro or macro level. So let's just step through these. Knowing self, that's things like a fitness tracker, it's tracking how many steps you take. Showing self, that's social media posts, Twitter posts, Snapchat, Instagram, any of that. You're showing, provides the opportunity of showing oneself to others. Knowing other at the micro level, if you have a teenage driver, you might have an app that's showing you where your teenage driver is, how fast they're driving, and things of that nature. On the macro level, your insurance provider may be doing the same for you, and you may have it in your car, and it's tracking things like how fast you brake, how fast you accelerate, how fast you go, and different things. And it's all because you're probably getting a better rate if you allow them to track you like this. Showing other at the micro level, that might be like a parent posting many updates about their child on a social media platform. So they're not showing themselves, but they're showing their child. Showing other at the macro level might be something like an organizational gamification system that's showing the performance of employees, and you're kind of seeing who's doing well and who may not be doing so well. And it's showing the other, making it visible for others to see. So what does this have to do with dignity? Let's establish what's meant by dignity first. And there's 3 meanings, and all of them are part of what it means, dignity means. First is behavioral dignity. And this is things like living, well, this means living a life of virtue, depending on what you think of as virtuous living. Goes back to Plato and Aristotle, the Greek philosophers, thinking of things like wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice as dignified living. And various religious philosophers and different religions also have notions of behavioral dignity, benevolence, righteousness, integrity. And some religions are thought to be the core values we should be aspiring to, and others it might be self-control and respect and tolerance. Then there's another meaning of dignity, and that's meritocratic. So dignity is status. It's first started with in the Greco and Roman times, where men were willing to give their lives or risk their lives for defending society. They would be rewarded with property and with titles, and they would be treated with a certain respect, and it had been earned. And then over time, it was less about being a warrior. It was more about having the property and the title. And then people as part of the property and titled class, the royal class, the elite class, the aristocratic class, were the ones endowed with the meritocratic dignity and treated with respect. By now, it's more just a social status and business ownership as opposed to being having a particular title, but certainly being part of the elite in terms of income and social status tends to signify that one gets treated a little bit with more respect. But then the other meaning of dignity is that everyone has the same value. So dignity is inherent value. Because you're human, you have inherent value. And this is based on Kant's philosophy that because humans have moral autonomy, they're different than all other species. And because they have moral autonomy, they have dignity. And because they have dignity, they have rights. And we cannot violate those rights. So even if you behave poorly and you don't exhibit what might be considered behavioral dignity, even if you're not having high status in society, you just have the same inherent value as everybody else. And this is behind human rights. It's behind notions of equality and so forth. So these are what we mean by dignity. And you can receive claims to dignity and affronts to dignity on all three forms. So claims are things like if you have access to resources that enable you to live a virtuous life. Affront would be conditions that preclude you from living such a life. The claim to meritocratic dignity is being recognized for doing well when you've done well. The affront to meritocratic dignity would be not being recognized when you actually deserve to be. A claim to inherent dignity is being treated as human, being treated as equal to others, being free, autonomous, having visibility, having a voice. An affront to inherent dignity was be treated by it as an object, or being treated as unequal in value, having your autonomy constrained or manipulated, or feeling and being invisible or voiceless. So these are the meanings of the dignity and what we mean by claim and affront. And then tying this back to personal data digitalization, we identify three forms of potential, we call them dignity disequilibrium. And the intrapersonal form is when you as an individual receive a claim to dignity from some personal data digitalization encounter, but you also receive an affront to dignity. Just give an example here. We'll take an example of a fitness tracker. So your fitness tracker is telling you how many steps you take every day. And that's great. So that's giving you knowledge about yourself, which is enabling you to live the life you might want to live. It's giving you a certain degree of better decision-making about yourself, right? So that's providing that data. At the same time though, it could potentially lead to affronts on your behavior, because maybe you start thinking, well, I've reached 10,000 steps, therefore I deserve 2 desserts instead of 1, or therefore, I deserve to have a nice drink tonight. So you start rewarding yourself for the steps that you've accumulated, but actually what you're rewarding yourself is, negating any positive gain in your health from the steps. So it's actually focusing your attention on one aspect of your health, and maybe it's causing you to neglect other aspects that might even be more important. So you're receiving a claim, but there's a potential also for an affront. So we refer to that as intrapersonal dignity disequilibrium. Interpersonal would be when the person receiving the claim is different from the person receiving the affront. So in this case, you can think of the Sharenting app, or the parents tracking their teenage drivers. So the parent is benefiting from the knowledge of knowing where their teenager is and knowing if they're driving safely and seeing where they are. The teenager, on the other hand, their autonomy is a little bit constrained because someone else knows where they are at all points of the day, can always be looking at where they are. Maybe the teenager doesn't want the parent to know every place they go to and everybody that they're seeing. So the claim to dignity is for the parent because it's giving them the knowledge they feel they need to be a better parent. The affront in this case is to the teenager. That's a case of interpersonal dignity disequilibrium. And the last form is the associative form. And this is when individuals who belong to a particular group receive some dignity claim just because they belong to that group, where individuals not belonging to that group experience an affront. And it's from the same personal data digitalization encounter. An example that we'll give here is from the SAT test, which is a college application test for students in the United States. And for a while, they had this adversity score, and it was computed by various things that no one knew, but it was computed by things like your zip code, your parents' income, and other things. And if you were part of the group that had a high adversity score, your score was interpreted differently by universities than if you weren't part of that group. Problem is, you might very well have faced a lot of adversity in life, but not been part of that group, because the way it was calculated didn't include your particular dimensions. So the people part of the group got this claim to dignity because they were being treated in a different way because of their background, whereas you were not benefiting from that same treatment. So our first theoretical assertion is that these personal data digitalization encounters of knowing and showing the self and others produce claims and affronts to dignity, resulting in these three forms of dignity disequilibrium. And the second two will go very quickly. So what we argue is that when you receive an affront to dignity, you're the one that feels the disequilibrium. The person receiving the claim does not. If you feel this affront, then you respond. You may forfeit your claim to dignity, you may fight it, you may try to abandon the technology, but you will respond. And we go through the arguments and the theorization about why. And the second theoretical assertion is simply that these forms of disequilibrium will trigger micro and macro level responses to restore the equilibrium. And then the last theoretical assertion deals with the fact that none of this is stable, it's dynamic. So there's new technologies coming along, new types of data being digitalized, from emotions to facial expressions, animal digitalization, different things. At the same time, the meaning of dignity is evolving. The Klamath River now has personhood rights. It's part of nature. Maybe nature has inherent value, right? Maybe future people who have not yet been born today, maybe they have dignity and we need to be thinking about them. Maybe animals have a certain inherent value and certain dignity just because they are life. So notions and how we think about dignity and who is owed respectful treatment and who has rights is also evolving. And this leads to our third and final theoretical assertion, was as these new meanings of dignity and new forms of personal data digitalization emerge, enable ever more knowing and showing, that this will trigger new claims and new affronts and set off new waves of this dignity disequilibrium. And one of our hopes is that moving forward, we'll see more systems come along that tell us not just about us, but tell us about our impact upon others. So things like, how many kind words have you said in your emails today, right? It can be keeping track of our language and how we use it and how uplifting it may be. So the things that are focused on with digitalization are the things that we draw our attention to, but we're hoping maybe new forms will appear that help us to be better aware of how our behaviors affect others and the dignity of others. So I'll turn it over to Olgerte now to talk about the implications of our theory.
So, well, thank you, Dorothy. So human dignity is the heart of care. So it's the pulse of care. And care takes this broader perspective in trying to explain this new reality shaped by personal data digitalization. And it complements and goes beyond the IS theories, such as identity theories, privacy, design theories. We have a very nice Excel table there in the paper where we map the different IS theories on how they map into the different care elements. We also hope that care will kind of facilitate the creation of a body of knowledge to try to understand the societal grand challenges. And for the system designers, we have a very clear message. We have design with dignity and design for dignity. So we have to think about new ways of designing, not only for system users, but actually for other individuals that are non-users or other individuals that are a part of a group or are not part of that group. Furthermore, we understood actually during our research that dignity, the design theories are mainly focused on supporting this inherent dignity that we just mentioned. So it's about human values, freedom, autonomy, self-expression. We need more design for supporting the behavioral dignity. We need more design for people to live a virtuous life, whatever virtuous meaning is, depending on the societal structure or family structure that a person is in. And when it comes to organizations, more and more we see that organizations take these initiatives to digitize employees' personal data. And that is mainly to boost their productivity, but at the same time to increase the organizational performance. So what we see here through the lens of CARE, or what we suggest, is for organizations to be aware that it is very important to try to understand and reflect on which part of the work is being digitalized, actually, because that will focus employees' attention. So we will see employees being focused on that part of the work, and maybe on the expense of other dimensions of the work that perhaps are more important. And furthermore, from the next slide, which I really like, because this shows a glimpse of our research project. When we created CARE, we were so close to the news. We were reading the news all the time. We were scanning the news outlets, and we were like, you know, back and forth with Dorothy in terms of, but who is the knower? Who is the shower? Who is knowing whom? Where do we draw the lines? What type of dignity affront do we see here? And that is very important because it provides new lenses, even from a governmental perspective. Governments need to know, okay, who are the stakeholders, who is the knower, how is dignity affront or dignity claims being distributed among different parties, right? Because we saw those different dignity disequilibrium forms, that one can enable a dignity claim, but then an affront can be experienced by another person. And when it comes to individuals, about us, right? What do we learn? Actually, is about the inability that we have to unknow and unshow, and that in itself create a dignity affront for us, because we get a constant knowledge. We focus on that data that is digitalized, and that kind of constrains our behavior. But at the same time, the other is very important, because even though we enjoy our claims to dignity by engaging with personal data digitalization, how does that translate to the other? Is that an affront to his or her dignity? So, for instance, this self-expression or cyberbullying, right? We have a fine line in here when we post things on social media. So yeah, I had to go a bit quick because of the time constraint, but I would recommend to read the paper. It's a very interesting piece of work. And I want to wrap it up by saying that we do care actually about the new reality that is emerging, and we hope you care too, and we advance this care theory a bit further. Yes.
Thank everybody for listening, and we're happy to take questions. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Dorothy and Ogata. Given that today our audience is large, we have about 300 attendees. We think it would be effective if we use the Q&A window to interact. So attendees, if you have your questions and comments, please enter them in the Q&A window. You can find it at the bottom of the Zoom window. You can ask our authors. Our authors will also use this function to respond to you. Thank you again, Dorothy and Ogata, for presenting your care theory. It deals with a grand challenge we are facing today, the human dignity in the context of personal data digitalization. You introduce the new theoretical, higher order theoretical elements in a coherent theoretical framework. And it's very interesting, Dorothy. When I read your paper, I found some insights from the Confucius school of thinking. So this reminds me, when I was in the primary school and the middle school, we have learned so many stories about people in the Confucius school. So next time when we meet in person, we can talk more about this, but on a different topic. So your paper is really a good example of to mobilize. Actually, when the senior editor team, Andrew, Brian, Susan, and myself discussed what we want, what we expect for papers in the special issue. One of the criteria that appear to be desirable to us is to mobilize, to stimulate future research questions. In your paper, we do see future research questions, very specific research questions, not just a handful of research questions, but sets of research questions, very rich implications for future research. So thank you very much for introducing your care theory to today's audience. Your theory is about human dignity and personal data digitalization. Is an example of the broader social technological interaction. So our next full paper also deal with the broader social technological interaction, but it's not a specific theory. It's about theorizing. So we put these two papers, full papers together in today's session. I think they can offer complementary insights for this important ongoing social technological interaction and transformation. May I invite Reza, please?
Sure, thank you. So should I start? Yep. Okay, so let me actually share the screen here first. So meanwhile, I would like to thank the senior editors who made it possible for me to be here today by creating a very inspiring, developmental, full of engagement and support review process that led us to be here today. So the paper that I'm going to present is a paper that I've written with Lucas Introna and Lotta Holton. It's entitled Everything Flows, Studying Continuous Socio-Technological Transformation in a Fluid and Dynamic Digital World. And we started this project by the observation that the digital phenomena that is around us is increasingly overflowing all of the conventional concepts and models that we have for understanding them. And we also noticed a lot of calls in the literature for sort of decentering and making things, the traditional IS phenomena that we traditionally have taken as bounded entities like organizations, technology users, and making them more, opening them up, viewing them as complex, decentered networks of actors. And so what we propose here today resonates with that sentiment, but we do it in an orthogonal direction. And that is that we want to decenter things temporally. We want to look at things through time and with a temporal perspective. So sort of our overall claim is to move from viewing IS phenomena as networks of actors and entities towards seeing them as meshworks of lines of action. More specifically, so the shift that we're advocating is to shift from putting actors and their relationships front and center in our studies, and this can be human actors or technological entities, towards attending to the temporal qualities of flows of action. And so to make it more concrete, for example, we can think of an IS phenomenon as sort of an arrangement of bounded entities and components, artifacts, users, organizations, different modules that interact with each other. And we can focus our studies at that interaction and their outcomes. Whereas what we propose here is to focus primarily on the rhythmic trajectories, the directions, the intensities, the momentums with which IS phenomena flows. So again, let's start with an example here. So, and again, this paper also illustration that it has, it's about social media, but the general idea is broader than social media. But for example, today, most social medias have the same set of features. Every social media, you can upload videos, pictures, there are hashtags everywhere. So all of the features are the same, but then still, and people sort of have kind of similar goals when they use these technologies, right? If we generally define the goals as, okay, want to share, want to be informed. But still there are differences between what Twitter is versus what Instagram is. And so sort of one concrete sort of problematic here is that how can we grasp these differences where all of the features are the same? And presumably all of the intentions to use these are similarly the same, but still there is a difference between how these technologies are used and how these technologies sort of what they are basically. So, and we sort of pin this down on two views of what a technology, or in this case, what an application is. If we view it as an entity, a set of features that does a specific task, or whether if we view the application, the software, as a continuous flow of a service or of an experience, for example. In the second case, then what really defines a flow is its temporal rhythm, is its intensity. So for example, going back to Instagram and Twitter, the first thing I notice as a person that is actually a practitioner of both is the tempo that is different. You know, you have a different rhythm on Instagram. You post a picture per day. If you do it more, people say he doesn't get it. What is he doing? Versus Twitter, it has a very instantaneous flow. So in the paper, we sort of start from a history of, you know, the move away from actors in IS literature. So we actually say that this sentiment of moving away from actor centricity is not new. And, but we sort of do a critique of the different approaches that exist and what their foreground and background. And we sort of highlight the stream 4 that is sort of underrepresented in IS research, one that decidedly focuses on temporal becoming and, you know, temporal confluences along flows of action. So in terms of something to compare throughout the paper, we always talk about interaction, and sort of confluences along, which is temporal. So to make this idea more concrete, we actually, or make it more analytical, we turn to the work of social anthropologist Tim Ingold, that has been for a while been advancing the idea that the primary condition of being in the world is not to be in a place, is not to be in a category, is not to be contained in a category, but it's always to be along a path, to move. So the primary condition of being is to move. And so he says we should move away from this metaphor of thinking about everything with building blocks and, you know, sort of spatial metaphors towards thinking about phenomena with lines or flowing lines, lines that flow in time, not lines that connect nodes in a network. And so what is, for example, special about a flowing line? We argued in the paper first that it has a duration. And by duration, we mean this quality that you cannot break it up. If you break it up, you lose what it is. So for example, the flow of a melody, a project, a football match is the very continuity of every action that builds upon the previous action. And sort of you can map this to different activities or acts, but that is at the expense of actually losing the flow of it as it flows in the moment. And secondly, that we say these lines are prior to any kind of actors that are brought into being along their flows. Again, as an example, we can visit an abandoned Facebook page or a dead GitHub repository, and you'll see that without most of the flows that were sort of animating these places, most of the possibilities for action, most of the possibilities that these places would have offered don't exist anymore. While the technology is there, the features are there, the intentions of the person who goes there is still there. But because the flows of activities that were passing through here are not there anymore, there's not much that these, well, technologies would do for you. So that's what we mean, that to bring something to life is to bring it back to its to the fluxes that animates it. So if lines are our unit of analysis or a unit of ontology, even, let's say, then what about relationality? How do lines relate to each other? And we show this in the paper by the metaphor or an allegory of a river, a flowing river, and we compare interaction, which is sort of, you know, you have the river banks and they exist and they interact with each other, with interaction, which is the from agential realism, that says that, okay, the banks don't pre-exist the practices that would alienate them in relation to each other. And then we say, okay, what we focus on and what we call, following Ingold, correspondence is in a 90-degree turn. It's actually relations through time. It's not the relations between the river banks, it's the relations between the flows, in our case, the flows of actions themselves. So it's a sort of a temporal notion of relationality, not relations between things, but relations between flows of action. So this idea of correspondence, to make it more to give it more analytical purchase, we detail 3 modalities that it has, saying that every moment of every sort of correspondence has a moment of timing, an attentional orientation, and an experience of undergoing. So timing, attentionality, and undergoing are the 3 modalities of correspondence, the 3 things together that correspondence has. And basically, one by one, they explain the creation, the sensing, and the actualization of possibilities for action. So basically, we can think of correspondence as a temporal theory of the dynamics of possibilities for action. I don't have the time here to actually go through sort of defining all of this. I just want to talk about the implications of each of these concepts vis-a-vis the things, for example, that we would generally care about in the literature in studying human-technology relationships. So when we say correspondence is a matter of timing, and by the way, we do have an empirical illustration in the paper of the case hashtag TCOT, Top Conservatives on Twitter. And we show the power and the usefulness of this vocabulary in analyzing that case. So basically, timing, the idea is that, okay, you have different flows of action, and when they confluence with each other at certain contingent points, they can create possibilities for action. So the possibilities for action is not that they always exist because you have a set of, for example, features and whatnot. It depends on timely correspondences between certain flows of action. And in that way, it actually gives us a broader decentered view of how action possibilities emerge. In our study of TCOT, we showed that, for example, action possibilities of using social media do not simply depend on people and social media, but there are all these other lines of action, from, you know, a radio program to another blog post, for example, that create the conditions for an action to become possible and plausible at a certain moment. And so it allows us to go beyond just the intersection of features and intentions as the focus of studying action possibilities. And it also allows us to go beyond recurrent patterns of action and also have, like, admit into our accounts serendipitous, coincidental moments that really create new possibilities for action. Secondly, we say that correspondence is a matter of attentionality. And by that, we mean that, okay, these flows come together and create certain possibilities, but to actually sense those possibilities requires one to go along with the flow. Again, we show this in our case that, for example, for these people to become social media users, to become social media activists, there was a flow of tweeting that they had to go along with. They couldn't just leave it and come back 1 hour later. There's this flow that if you want to sort of continue enjoying the experience, the agency that you have in that phenomenon, you have to go along with the flow. So we say that it actually, this concept of attentionality allows us to go beyond the dominance of intentionality in IS research, that in technology use, you always have to have a certain goal and you have to know in advance why you're using a technology. And we show it in our case, how actually people just start using a technology, and through using the technology, they realize there is this new possibilities and they can become new kind of, enjoy new possibilities, become even new people in the sense that become activists, for example. But that requires, as I said, keeping up with the flow and with the intensities and the rhythms of the flow. And thirdly, that correspondence is a matter of undergoing, meaning that okay, you sense these possibilities, but to actually actualize them requires you undergoing a change. You will not remain the same thing after having actualized these possibilities. So you always sort of rediscover yourself as having these new possibilities. You enjoy them, you long for them, and you reinvent your path because you want to continue having those possibilities. Like a YouTuber who suddenly realizes that there's these videos that are picking up viewers, and then they just continue sort of creating similar videos, and they just continue going down that path. Again, the broader point here is that this idea of undergoing relaxes the assumption of owning agency, whether it be humans having agency or material agency, and sort of frees us from this discussion of whether that agency is symmetric or asymmetric. It actually sort of attributes the agency as an emergent outcome of the flow. So while attending to the flow and going along with the flow, you become swept up and animated. You suddenly find yourself as able to enjoy certain possibilities for action. So it's a temporal question again. You don't have agency. Sometimes you get to exercise agency. But the broader point here is that that exercise of agency changes you, changes the possibilities that exist. Again, we show this in our case, for example, how the idea that there is this community, there's this hashtag that people are using, the fact that more and more people will come and use it actually makes it less and less, it sort of fades away the opportunities that exist for everybody. So this idea that at least with social and collaborative technologies, when you actualize possibilities for action, you're changing the same possibilities for actions for others. Again, making this idea of possibilities for action more temporal and dynamic. So that's our vocabulary. So that basically the idea of lines correspond, and correspondence is a matter of timing, attentionality, and undergoing. The third sort of, the last third of the paper is about, okay, now if we agree with these ideas, what can we do? What type of research can we do? And there we sort of have some suggestions or guidelines as to what kind of research would be more, what kind of research questions or what kind of research practices would be more conducive towards this kind of ideas. I will refer you to read the paper on that in the interest of time, if I had picked your interest here. But basically, the idea is that, okay, if lines are the units of analysis, how can we capture lines? The best way to capture lines, we think, is to treat them as storylines. And the kind of research method that we suggest that would be more conducive towards this type of ideas is what we call a flow-oriented genealogical research. Basically, to formulate research questions, and there are examples in the paper for different sort of substantive areas of interest like affordances, virtual teams, agile development. but to formulate research questions that aim at revealing how conditions of possibility for action are created, sensed, and actualized along the flows of different phenomena. So a temporal view, like the dynamics of the conditions of possibilities. It will require that kind of flow-oriented genealogical research will require 3 shifts in our understandings of relationality, temporality, and transformation. As I have it was implied in what I discussed here, and it is sort of expounded in the paper. So I'll leave it for you to go and read the paper on that. So basically, the paper that we've written, we think it offers an innovative theory of socio-technological transformation, a theory of transformation that does not require original actors as the points of beginning for transformation. Specifically, it's a theory on the temporal dynamics of creation, sensing, and actualization of action possibilities. Secondly, the analytical vocabulary that we offer, flowing lines of action, correspondence, and correspondence being about timing, attentionality, and undergoing. It's an analytical vocabulary that allows us to further embrace process thinking and theorizing, as I sort of glossed over it, but our study is sort of rooted in the process tradition. But at the same time, we encourage the broader IS research community to engage with these ideas, because you don't have to be in the process stream to actually sort of be able to sort of appreciate some or most of these ideas about rhythms and momentums and flow more specifically. And so, yeah, we invite, correspondences between these ideas and the community. We think that these ideas open a horizon of possibilities where we can develop new ways of understanding and practicing and theorizing these digital phenomena that are constantly overflowing our conventional models. Yeah, thank you. I think I went over time already.
Thank you, Reza, Lucas, and Lotta for producing and presenting a flow-centric approach of theorizing. Just now, when I listened to your presentation, I actually thought about what I learned from the care theory. Dorothy and Olga discussed also flows, right? The personal data digitalization, showing and knowing, then affecting human dignity, then human beings' reaction, and eventually perhaps new equilibrium. So it appears to be flows. So Reza, what do you think? Using your flow-centric approach or lens for theorizing for the human dignity and personal data digitalization. So any thoughts about that?
I mean, the most self-serving thought would be that, of course, if it's a good theory, it should be applicable to a lot of use cases. But yeah, I think, well, more specifically, we talk about the flows of action, but to move from flows of action to flow of data. So what I'm trying to say is that it wouldn't be just the flow of data. It would actually be sort of the flow of the evolution of regulatory schemes, the flow. So you can sort of identify different storylines and how each storyline is flowing, and how sort of at certain moments the confluence between these storylines will create new possibilities or new conditions and will create a transformation. So in that sense, of course, it will sort of, the flow of data is one of the flows that could be there, but also the other flows, as I mentioned, It depends whether we want to look at it temporally. If we do, then it's a very good idea to look. Basically, temporality for us is not just a matter of past, present, future. It's about momentum. It's about intensity. It's about rhythm. So yeah, of course we can.
Sure.
So for example, you can sort of even think about what kind of rhythm is more conducive towards dignity. What kind of rhythm of collecting or presenting personal data is more conducive towards a sort of what is the name for dignity-full life?
Human dignity.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for
I don't
sharing
know,
your
Lucas,
thoughts.
if you wanted to add something. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you to many thanks to the authors of the full theory papers. These two papers deal with broadly the social technological interaction, and another common theme. That's my take. Another common theme of the two papers is that they are thinking at higher levels, higher level theory, a broader approach. As I mentioned at the very beginning of today's session, we actually heard different opinions when we work for this special issue. Some people, there may be different thoughts for useful theories, not necessarily solely at the general and higher levels. There are thoughts for useful theorizing at more timely, nimble, and more granular levels. Next, may I invite Monica, Nicole, and Rajiv to present their theories in flux, which talk about theorizing at different levels.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank the special issue editors. We went through several iterations with them. At some point, we almost started making them authors because they helped us so much in tweaking our ideas. I want to give a little background on how this paper came to be. So we were fortunate that ICIS was in San Francisco, right next to Silicon Valley. And we had, Rajiv and I had proposed a panel on this topic, can machine learning help in theory building? It was a very animated panel, very well attended, and we got lots of really good ideas. But we also had the opportunity, thanks to one of our co-authors, Nicole, who is out in Silicon Valley, to go interview folks in Silicon Valley on how they make decisions. What are their micro theories that they're using to make decisions? And how are they using machine learning to do this? And we got some great ideas. Nicole, our co-author, is an academic that has moved from academia to industry. And this gave us also a really interesting perspective because she understands our world, but she also understands that world. So we wanted to see how could we incorporate these things? And so we thought of this idea of a theory in flux. Oops, hang on. So what is a theory in flux? So we define a theory in flux as an evidence-based inference that emerges from analyzing large amounts of data. So as Sean alluded, this idea that we can create these micro theories based on large amount of information and not waiting for them to become grand theories to publish them. So talking about them when we find them. And how do we do this? Well, we use machine learning as an opportunity, first of all, to collaborate with practitioners and their organizations in developing theory. So when they are finding things, can we help them describe what they're seeing? Or taking data from industry and staying more objective and creating theories that way. So in two different methods. And then we can take these TIFs, these theories of flux, and refine them into generalizable theories. So some of them may not stick. Some of them may be grouped with other TIFs to form a larger theory with a capital T. So what are the criteria then for our theories in flux? They're slightly different than the criteria that we use, the traditional criteria that we use for theory. So we like to say that theory has to be generalizable, right? That is a core objective. Our TIF instead are going to be context specific. So it's, we value a context specific solution over generalizability. One of the things that really struck us, we were talking to somebody at Slack, and they said to us, they didn't like generalizability in their context because it's like a Swiss Army knife. It does lots of things poorly. They like very context-specific decision-making theories. We also say that theories have to be replicable. This is a requirement. Our TIFs replicability is not pursued. Again, context-specific knowledge. We also say that theories need to be parsimonious, right? For simplicity. Well, with machine learning, we have the ability to look at many variables, right? We do struggle with the issue of then transparency if we don't understand what some of these variables stand for, but our goal is to come up with microtheories that explain phenomenon and publish them quickly. I don't know if my co-authors want to pipe in. Did I miss anything in the criteria?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add was that this criteria that we have listed here actually emerged from our conversations with industry folks that Monica just mentioned, and specifically the conversation with the gentleman from Slack, where he said that generalizability is not a virtue in their industry because the amount of work that they have to put in to take a generalizable theory and apply it to their context is often not worth the effort. And because of machine learning, they can utilize technology to quickly come up with a more context-specific theory than use a generalizable theory that is 80% applicable. And hence the idea of theory in flux, because you can't have both. You can't have an established theory that is quickly developed without having to go through the rigor that we often associate with that.
We also heard this echoed by the head of machine learning at Andreessen Horowitz, who said generalizability is not a virtue. And I thought that was particularly notable because he is heading up venture capital investments across a portfolio of areas, and good enough was actually what was often the best case, particularly from an investment and action standpoint. And from an MIS perspective, we really want to be focusing in on what is the best case for business impact and business decisions.
So we were asked when we wrote the provocation, what was our call to action? So we have three. The first is that academics must be able to publish TIF-based research, right? So we want to not have to wait until it's an established theory to get these ideas out. We also say that academics and practitioners in the IS community have to be pragmatic in adopting evidence-based TIFs. So just like medicine and healthcare, adopt proven practices before the controlled trial or controlled experiments, we should be able to do the same with our findings. And also, IS researchers should take a lead. We are seeing papers in marketing and management where our colleagues are already doing this in their journals. And we should be leading this because we have the background. We have the design scientists. We have very capable ground theorists that could be taking the lead in putting this information out there and essentially accelerating and then going through cycles of iteration in building and speeding up scientific discovery in information systems. And Nicole, I wanted you to comment because this, part of this work was sort of Nicole's view as she struggled in academia with the speed of getting findings out there, and her perspective now working she's a successful venture capitalist. So Nicole, if you could comment.
Yeah, I will say this is, I think, one of the areas where MIS has a key opportunity, and I don't want to say struggles, but it's one of our challenges is our speed or lack of speed to what is our market, right? Our very, very long publication cycles is what hinders us the most. If we look at fields, even like computer science, their speed of publication of findings is what is one of their strongest strengths. And if we continue to have very, very long publication cycles, technology just moves too fast. And I agree that we do need to make sure that we are vetting our strongest theories and our best theories, but TIFFs give us an opportunity to share building blocks and then not limit the potential of these building blocks to a single group or a single set of researchers, and instead share them broadly so that we can learn together. Because if we limit them and require time, theories are not wine. They do not need to be aged. And if we require this length, it really limits. And that actually that was one of the strongest promptings for me to leave academia, because what I was researching was just moving too quickly for the speed of academia, and it ended up being one of the forefront movements in software development and delivery. And it was a good move for me, but it would be unfortunate if we continue losing some of our strongest researchers. Not that I'm implying I'm one of them, but I would hate to see us lose some of our strongest researchers because we don't have a place for them within our traditional existing publishing paradigm.
So one of the panelists on our panel at ICIS from Netflix actually said that your loss of Nicole is our gain because she was back in industry.
So in closing, we think that the MIS is uniquely positioned to use machine learning and create TIFFs. We have a long history of solving business problems with IT, and this TIFF allows us the ability to speed up the discovery process as new technologies emerge. And that machine learning TIFFs have the potential to further that role. And thank you for listening to our presentation.
Thank you, Monica, Nicole, and Rajiv for presenting a very provoking and interesting piece. And actually, in the past 2 years, we exchanged ideas about your provocation. I also debate with myself about the value of being generalizable. Still, I don't have an answer even to myself, but I deeply thank you for pushing me to keep thinking on the value of even trying to make generalizable theory. I think keep thinking and having debate is a professional bonus of being academic, right? No matter what theorizing approach we use, being generalizable or not, the ultimate goal is to advance theory. That's so far, what we heard in the 3 works so far we heard in today's session. What will be even more interesting in the next provocation is that the authors argue a focus on no theory. So may I invite Sudharan and Paulo goes?
Hi, can you guys hear me? Okay, excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting this provocation paper. So this is something that Paulo and I worked on together. This is something we're very passionate about at the University of Arizona. And as Sean mentioned, it was very interesting to hear the first 3 presentations, especially the first 2, which started with theory development. And the second one, which sort of extended it by saying that there's theories in flux. our provocation here stems on the fact, and remember, this is a provocation. It stems on the fact that we have an opportunity in our field, and that opportunity is to address grand challenges and not necessarily be fixated on theory. So we live in a very exciting world today, a world where we call it the fourth industrial revolution, fueled by big data and AI and lots of different technologies. And so there's an opportunity for us to, for the information systems field, to actually make a complete paradigm shift in terms of the research and in terms of the impact that we are going to be able to make. More than ever in the IS field, we feel that we need to focus on solving grand challenges facing society and actually avoid this fixation on theory. And IS has to lead with high impact research. We must create research programs that generate solutions that impact the world beyond academia. And so as a part of this, knowledge will be advanced and new theorizing may occur. And the focus is on the word may. However, theory development must not be a prerequisite for this effort. And so as we go through, I'll argue that the IS publication practice needs to be revised. And I think Nicole, Monica, and Rajiv alluded to this a little bit, but we're going to go into a little more detail. And in doing so, we want to be able to focus on grand challenges. And when it comes to publishing, we argue that the design science paradigm has to be considered as at face value, coupled with the new developments in data science as creation of solutions and artifacts and not necessarily advancement of theory. So what is high impact research? So our definition, which we've adapted from existing sources, is that high impact research is an effect on change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, environment, quality of life, but something that goes beyond academia. And so to put it very simply, impact is the difference that academic research makes to the wider world, which is we really have to think beyond citations in the academic world. We have to think beyond just who's citing our journal or our paper in our field. It has to go beyond things like, into things like funding, etc. And I'll talk a little more about that. So given that this is our argument, we draw upon our experiences on the Arizona big science way of doing things. At Arizona, and I'll give a couple of examples here, we have sustained over a period of, I would say, 40, 45 years, very comprehensive research programs in information systems by addressing big questions and grand challenges since 1974. So our measure of success of the big science way has been in terms of interdisciplinary grant sponsored research, patents, technology transfers, startups, lots of industry partnerships. Of course, we have lots of PhD dissertations and publications, but not just in IS journals, but in a lot of interdisciplinary journals. These programs are long lasting, they are comprehensive, and the results show in terms of more than $200 million of funding that our program has received, which is very unique in a business school. So here are some examples that we have in the paper. I'm not going to go through all of these examples, but what I want to point out here is that all of these examples, whether it's the early start on group decision support that Jay Nunamaker made, or a COPLink, which is on law enforcement, there's trust and deception, there is semantic data integration, all of these, what we've learned from all of these is the fact that it is possible to make an impact in the real world, but we don't necessarily have to start with theory. We don't even have to develop a theory. we can develop general guidelines, and whether you want to call it a theory or not, we're not sure, but definitely doesn't have to have a prerequisite of theory. So what are some lessons we've learned from our program of Big Science is that long-term research is not opportunistic. It is deliberate, it is thoughtfully designed, it's facilitated by funding from a combination of federal and private sources. Theory development is not a requirement of high impact research. IS research is really about creating knowledge and providing impactful solutions that address grand challenges. In some instances, theory validation is achieved or pre-theory findings are uncovered as a byproduct of the overall research approach. However, there is again no requirement for a priori theory that dictates the approaches to be used. Third, we feel that research that addresses grand challenges is by design interdisciplinary and requires collaboration among many different partners from many different domains across the university campus. It's not necessarily just business school departments collaborating, but our interdisciplinary Big Science projects have collaborations in the sciences, in medicine, sociology, physics, atmospheric sciences, you name it. So it's really across different institutions and domains. Design science is at the core of some of this multidisciplinary grand challenge focused research, that is design of artifact systems, algorithms, and models. This may lead to patents and tech transfer or commercial ventures. In many cases, it has also led to direct impact on organizations that have adopted the solutions and tools that are generated, and that in fact creates a very big impact. And one of the things that we've learned is rather than being opportunistic in kind of saying, I have a data set and I'm going to mine the heck out of it and publish something, what we suggest is we advocate starting with a grand challenge and then going about it the way Herbert Simon would have proposed, which is collecting various kinds of data to provide a 360-degree view of the problem and to develop a solution to it. So our calls to action are, how do we go about doing something like this? This is not easy. It is something that's different. It's a paradigm shift. So we suggest creating a high impact grand challenges track in some of our top IS journals with its own set of perhaps subset of editors, fostering a different culture in business schools where grants and interdisciplinary collaborations are valued. And interdisciplinary collaborations by nature take time. You have to learn each other's language. You have to learn to communicate with each other. And publications happen in a diverse set of journals. In fact, this is highly valued by grant agencies that fund long-term grants like NSF and NIH and some of the government sources. They're not just looking at IS journal publications, but looking at publications in diverse journals. Mentoring for grant writing and support is hugely important, and facilitating building industry partnerships, because truly successful high impact research takes funding, it takes grand challenges, it also takes industry support, because the three, when put together, create a really explosive partnership. But what's also important is, of course, it's important to publish our research, and therefore planning for research publications, especially when it comes to industry partnerships, is very important, because industry partners expect solutions in a more rapid time frame, as was pointed out in the earlier presentation, and therefore negotiating with them and having them understand the importance of disseminating the research in the form of conference and research publications and generating co-authored publications, and starting from that from the beginning of the project is hugely important. And then most of all, we think this is an opportunity to combine design science with data science, because that's the way the world is moving, which is we have a lot of these data sources available for solving these grand challenges. And therefore, making sure that this kind of approach is valued by journals is very important. So finally, I want to conclude by saying that, in terms of evaluating high impact research that kind of follows this approach, not necessarily starting with an a priori theory or even having the goal of theory creation, we evaluate research and publications using criteria such as those proposed by the National Science Foundation, which is they talk about the intellectual merit of the research and the broader impacts on society. So in summary, IS Field has a unique opportunity to lead by embracing a new approach for solving grand challenges of our times, whether it's in future of work, drug discovery, personalized medicine. And we hope we've provided a roadmap for the necessary programmatic research that has the ability to create a paradigm shift. And this is the best time when we can actually do this and become more relevant in the whole scheme of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudan, for presenting this it is a provocation. It is a kind of provocation we want to have in this special issue. So may I ask one question? Do we have to make a choice between big impact and theory?
I don't think so. Paulo, you can jump in anytime you want. I don't think we're saying that it's a choice. We're saying that we don't have to choose between the two, but we're saying we don't necessarily, currently the way our field is geared is a lot of it is based on theory, starting with a theory, creating a theory eventually. And we're saying, is that even essential? That's the provocation here. And perhaps there's, both ways. You can think about our field sort of being holistic and thinking in two different directions. Paulo, did you want to jump in and say anything here?
Yeah, I do think it's complementary. So we have to do both. When I was EIC of MIS quality for 3 years, a few years ago, I always struggled with giving more opportunities for design science to come to the surface. And I always found those barriers of people trying to judge design science, solution-driven kind of a research based on where is the theory development. And then I lean back on the experience of Arizona, where this is the model that we have there, the big science model. And I think there's a lot of value, a lot of impact. And I think at some point we need to put the two things together. So that's the nature of the provocation.
Thank you, Paulo, for sharing your editor's view. I did read your current provocation with your previous editorial about the design science one together. Andrew, I see you are nodding. You are the current EIC. You also published a design science paper. So what do you think the role of theory in a design science paper? Can you share with us some of your thoughts?
It's not possible to answer that in like 10 seconds or something. But I think there's 256 people currently on this seminar, and I think there's a healthy diversity in the views. And in fact, it's the diversity that we want. So I totally agree with Sudha and Paulo that if we have one view driving the field, that would be enormously disadvantageous for us. So we need that diversity. And I think we can look to schools like Arizona and the work that Paulo and Sudha have done personally, individually, as models of success that we can learn from. And they've been doing it, as Sudha said, for 40 years. So if we don't see that as a successful model, well, then I think, who are we kidding? And I also completely agree with the grand challenge idea. I'll come back to that at the end. All of us as individuals went into academia for a reason, and it's likely that it wasn't just to publish papers, right? So, yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. Build on Andrew, no matter which approaches and perspectives we take, we want to address grand challenge. We want to make impact. So our last provocation also considers impact of econ and other disciplines on each other. So Alex, may I invite you to present your provocation?
Thank you, Sean. Can you see the slides?
Not really.
Let me try.
Sean, it looks like we may be having some technical difficulties with Alex. While we let him reconnect, you might want to, I don't know, ask the panelists to discuss a question while we're waiting.
Sure. And I actually today we have listened to two full theory papers, and so far two provocations. So we four senior editors, when we designed this session, we chose the pieces carefully. I think Alex is back.
I'm sorry about that. Terribly sorry. Yeah.
Alex,
Is that fine now?
Yeah, it's here. Yeah.
So sorry about that. Thank you, Sean, and hello everyone. I'm Alex, and it's a great pleasure for me to present this provocation on behalf of my co-authors, Eric and Michael. First, I think we would like to thank the editors of the special issue for the invitation. Their hard work in making the special issue happen is greatly appreciated. And they have definitely provided very valuable inputs during our writing of this article. I think basically after we received the invitation for writing this provocation, we thought about the key challenges and issues faced by IT economics researchers. Our discussion led to the conclusion that to push the economics of IT research forward, we need to build on the previous establishment made by the collective community, and more importantly, we need to move forward with a more open research agenda to tackle the challenging issues that actually calls for a joint effort from IT and economics researchers. I don't think the rapid changing technology infrastructure on which the digital economy is built requires more introduction. In less than 50 years, we have progressed from analog to digital world. The current smack stack of computing technology is changing yet again how business operates. Information technology development resulted in a more significant share of the digital economy. In China, if I remember correctly, the number last year was 36.2% of the total GDP value added. We believe that economics of IT research is an exciting field. On a daily basis, there are new things to study. On one hand, IT provides new research subjects. In the short history of IT research, we have studied the effect of technology adoption on productivity, the digital distribution channel, social media, digital marketing, app economy, online platforms, sharing economy. I think the list goes on. By catching these waves of technology change, we shed light on many important and mostly new economic phenomena. However, we also seem to have developed this habit of referring to economics theory as a reference confirming rather than try to innovate in economic thinking. On the other hand, IT provides new research methods, massive online experiments, machine learning, and intelligence simulations. All these are promising tools for innovative theory development and empirical research. Yet we seem to be more comfortable accepting regressions, event studies, and structural models that have been, kind of extensively utilized in traditional economics research. As economists are questioning whether the digital economy actually requires new economics, we believe that there remains a question about to what extent does IT economics research help us to change our thinking about economy and economics research. We made a simple comparison about cross-reference discipline references. In the past 10 years, from 2010 to 2019, econ journals generated only 27 references, while our community contributed more than 3,000 citations to econ journals. The number in the UTD list looks a little bit better, but there is still a gap between the in-referencing and out-referencing numbers. This gap kind of illustrates the insufficient impact of economic IT research on economics and management theory development. We argue in this article that to promote the economics of IT research impact, we need to focus on challenging issues and ask challenging questions. We listed 8 questions in the article. This is not supposed to be comprehensive, just things that we really kind of are interested in our everyday research. This includes IT's impact on organizations and markets, transforming decision-making, important social and economic issues, such as inequality, privacy, filter bubbles, and more importantly, how can we develop a more proper measure for the digital economy, and how we can reconceptualize the economics as a research field. We kind of also try to think about ways that motivate research effort in these challenging questions. And we argue that we need to adopt a new mindset in evaluating new econ of IT and digitalization research. On the question level, I think we should focus on novelty and interestingness. Where research tradition deserves respect, we can and we need to move to be more open to novel questions of interdisciplinary nature. I think the previous 2 provocations also talk about similar ideas. On the methodology level, we should avoid favoring familiar or popular methods and emphasize on correct applications and useful innovations. Regarding the research outcomes, preferences should be directed to important and impactful findings and innovations. Let's take the AI and big data, this trending technology as an example. The question about IT productivity gain reoccurs every time a new wave of IT adoption happens, artificial intelligence being the latest. To tackle this question, we need to investigate how AI and big data actually changed decision-making. And if we adopt the new mindset, it would not be hard to come up with a list of questions that tackle this challenging question about AI's impact on decision-making. And we believe these questions, which are listed here, should attract significant research effort. However, if we continue to act conservatively and adopt the old mindset, some of these questions may appear to be risky or even deemed as irrelevant to the IS researchers. Not only we should leverage IT to capture new research subjects by adopting a different mindset, we believe we also have the opportunity enabled by new IT infrastructures, which kind of give us the potential to drive a paradigm shift in social science research as a whole. The 3 building blocks include access to nano-level data, advanced machine learning algorithms, and the full digitization of business environment, highlighted or featured by digital platforms and new market organizations. It is our opportunity to make IT matter in theoretical economics research through methodology innovations. Just to summarize, the economics of IT research have made impressive achievement in the past 20 or 30 years. However, there is still plenty of room for us to change our focus and mindset to leverage on the rapid IT development and try to enhance our impact in a broader research community. Okay, I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for
Eric was about to, yeah, I think Eric is supposed to be here, but yeah, anyway.
Okay, so when you mentioned Eric, it did remind me of the old days when I read his article about IT paradox many years ago. And just now you talk about a piece of new work on the new paradox, right? About half a century ago, Robert Solow coined the term IT paradox. Then I think more than 200 papers, 300 papers examined this IT paradox issue, and the conclusion is it was gone. Then around the year of 2000, Rajiv Banker and his colleagues published a paper on the new paradox. And today, you talk about another new paradox. If the industry just used AI for replacing human workers. So this is a signal that we do need to keep our eyes open to new phenomena and new opportunities of doing econ research. So being open is one of the key words I heard repeatedly today in today's session. So I think that's a good signal. As long as our field collectively is open to new phenomena, open to different approaches, diversity, like Andrew mentioned just now, it is a good signal that our field will be able to grow and be able to keep healthy and even healthier. Okay, I think right now it's about the time to hand it over to Andrew for final comments. But before doing that, I want to make an announcement. An announcement for the next session, which will be held on February 4th. There are more insightful theory papers and provocations. Please join us on February 4th. Okay, Andrew, may I hand it over to you for final comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone, the authors, everybody who's here as a participant. Really, we're thrilled as editors to be able to do this, and even seeing the answers to the questions. I think being able to ask those questions and see answers straight away is a great thing for all of us. And it's really exciting, particularly as the editors here, to sort of see the work we've been working on with these authors come to life immediately and be taken in new ways and creative ways by all of you. Look, when we took on this special issue, we did it because we were highly motivated, that we felt that developing and debating theory, developing and debating the roles of theory is the intellectual life of the field. And with the growing dependence of the world on ICT and digitalization, having a vibrant, productive intellectual life of our field is so important. It's important for our external stakeholders, addressing the grand challenges of our time. It's important for ourselves and our scholarly lives. It's important for our field. And it's important for our journals like MISQ. we really saw this as an opportunity as a senior editors and the editorial board to nurture and celebrate and advance that intellectual life of our field. However, that life now, since we've worked on it as authors and editors, it now depends on you and the community taking these papers further, taking these ideas further, taking that intellectual life further. You can see from the kinds of papers and provocations we brought that we want to do that creatively. There's not a single view. No one has a monopoly on knowledge or intellectual life. So it depends on you taking it further. We look forward to you doing it in creative, diverse, and non-conservative ways. And as a journal, we look forward to all of your contributions. And as a field, we look forward to the success that we can bring to each other and to our stakeholders. So thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you particularly to our authors, and thank you to Brian and his crew at Maryland for running this so successfully.
Thank you.